What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the Philosophical Misfit podcast. What I'm going to be sharing with you all and talking to you all about today might come as a surprise to some of you if you're not a consistent consumer of my content or watch my content or listen to my podcast or even know who I am. Then it can appear very confusing because the title of my last podcast was God Needs to Die. So that some of the comments from that were fun. But you know, what I'm going to mention to you all and talk to you about in this video is how I'm also a man of faith, which I don't know, this might piss some people off. I recognize, all right, so I say that because my views on faith and belief, basically, I realize that these terms are very subjective. Now, on my YouTube channel, I've done, personally, and then I created a YouTube video talking about it. I've done a in-depth etymological, which is the study of the words and how the words came into being, a in-depth etymological look at both belief and faith and how they came to be what they are, why they mean what they mean, why we say them, why they're two separate words. Even in a church culture, they're used interchangeably. I just needed to know. The reason being why I needed to know is when I first started to deconstruct religion, the God that I knew, the ideology, the philosophy that I had of God. When I started to deconstruct that, one of the verses that I was drawn to is a very popular verse among Bible reading people, which is Romans 10:9, which is basically the verse on salvation. If you believe in your heart that Jesus raised from the dead, then you will be saved. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that Jesus raised from the dead, then you will be saved. I don't know if that is exact. That's more, I think that's more along the lines of the NASB version, which is more of a direct word-for-word translation instead of thought-for-thought. But that's the version that I read, and so that's why I say that. But anyway, that verse, it mentions belief. And so obviously there was confessing with your mouth, which people just, they see that and so they say, oh, okay, so if you say Jesus is my Lord, then you are saved. But they forget the other half of the verse, which is, and believe in your heart that Jesus raised from the dead, then you will be saved. This intrigued me. And this was this was a blockage for me that I was like, I need to understand what belief is, to understand if I'm even saved, to understand if I even believe in God. What is belief? What is faith? And there was a period where I read the entire New Testament the entire New Testament and Genesis over again in the span of, I don't know, five days, a week. And I saw things that I hadn't seen before because I had a new perspective that I wasn't looking at the scriptures in this way, the Bible in this way. And I saw these distinctions between faith and belief that were consistently put in the Bible. Like, people in church use them interchangeably, but as I was reading the Bible, I saw, okay, there is a clear difference between faith and belief. And again, this is something that I've talked about on my channel. I did the whole etymological study, and I put that video out, as well as a couple other videos explaining how I view the difference between faith and belief. Now, it can be very subjective. People see it in a different light. People see it in a different way. When they see it in a different way, when you're only paying attention to the Hellenic Greek language, which is how we got into basically the Greeks' understanding of faith and belief, instead of the Hebrew or the Jewish understanding of faith and belief, which, by the way, there is no concept of faith and belief. Whenever we think of faith and belief, it's a very airy sort of philosophical thought. But the Jewish people, whenever you said faith or belief, a picture came to mind, and that was a picture of a craftsman. Craftsman, I can say it, craftsman. And so it was very concrete. It wasn't this airy, up in the air philosophical thing that was, oh, I believe in something or I have faith in something. They understood it to be something very concrete. And it was and the word for it was emunah, which you can look that up. It means it's an interesting word. It's an interesting word, and it's an interesting word study to do. So I looked at the understandings of why we say and why we use the words faith and belief in our understanding of it, which really comes from a Greek understanding. But then there's the understanding of the Hebrew language, Hebrew culture, and the Jewish culture, and what faith and belief means. And so I went deep into looking at the different cultures, looking at the different meanings, looking at the etymology, but I felt it necessary to start from, okay, so you can have your own ideas of faith and belief, but I said to myself, which made sense to me, that if I really want to understand what these words mean in, the Bible, in that book, I have to know these definitions, have this understanding of actual faith in a Jewish and Hebrew context, and then apply them to the New Testament. And so I needed to see them with that understanding in context for me to actually understand the difference between faith and belief, at least biblically, and which, now looking at things outside of the Bible, I think that the ways, the concepts that I have now come to understand what the difference is between faith and belief have helped me even philosophically, or they've helped ground me in knowing exactly where I'm at. That, I don't believe in God, but I do have faith that there is something more. You can say that's God. I don't know. This is where it gets sticky and hairy and all sorts of, I don't know, just sticky and hairy, descriptive weird language that describes, like, I don't know, just some people call me atheist. They say, well, do you believe in God? And I say, well, no. They say, okay, you're an atheist. But I'm like, but I am a man of faith. That's very foreign to people. They don't understand that. And so basically, in a sense, the two concepts that when I looked at the Bible, when I looked at scriptures in the context of it, and I felt I needed to go back in the Bible, in the context of the Bible, to really get a grasp on the meaning, the original meaning of these words, even though they've changed throughout history. If I'm going to read the Bible, if I'm going to read this text and try to understand faith and belief from this, then I need to not only have all the understanding that I was talking about, but I need to have, yes, the understanding, not only that, like I just said, but, see, I'm losing my train of thought here. I have a lot of things that I need to create a base, I'm doing this, it's like 8 minutes in the podcast, and the video I did on faith and belief is a half hour long, and then I did other, 10, 12 minute videos talking about the difference between faith and belief. And so I'm trying to cram all this information so that you guys understand where I'm coming through making the statement that I'm saying, which is I don't believe in God, but I do have faith in something greater. And I think even, and people aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but I will explain, I promise. And I even think atheists, yes, no, they don't have belief, but I think atheists, some even, they do have faith. And I'll get to that. But anyway, going in the Bible, I needed to go back to the Bible, not only with that understanding, but with the knowledge that this is where it all started. And so if I'm going to really understand these words, I have to start at the beginning. I know they are not the oldest of holy texts and scriptures. But as far as I am aware, they do give, more of a concept of faith and belief than other, scriptures of holy text. I could be wrong about that, but as far as I am aware, that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's what I've gathered. And so in order to really grasp the meaning of the original meaning and usage of these words, I went back to, the Bible. So, from all of that, the concepts, what I came up with, not what I came up with. That's a bad way of putting it. Even though it is very subjective, so in some way this is my interpretation of it, but I do really think when looking at the scriptures in the original language and the etymology of how faith and belief came to be, I do, and in the context, that's a huge thing, because if you just look at the definitions, it can be easy to misunderstand and to mistranslate and to say, oh yeah, they are interchangeable. But when you look at the context of the scriptures, of the book, you see that they are very different. And so faith, my concept of faith, from what I understand and from the study that I've done, is wow, I just hit the mic. I don't know if you picked up on that or not. But anyway, faith is the willingness to be intimate with the unknown. So it's like complete darkness. There's no actual experience, knowledge, or understanding, but you are acting on, it's a choice. You are acting on, and as if there is something inside that darkness of the unknown, which can be that fear, which can be, unknowns have a lot to do with fear. But I'm not going to get into that because I could go on a whole new trail with that. But I'll just say an unknown. Belief is really the knowledge that is gained from an experience. So when you come into a belief of something, it not only means that you have personally experienced it, but what I think, and there are scriptures that I see that back this up. And again, I'm only pointing to scripture because it seems to be an older text that is much closer to the original meanings of these words and how they came to be. So I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm not trying to give you like this biblical outline of what faith and belief is, even though some might interpret it that way. I'm literally just trying to find the original meaning of these words and why they've changed, because they've obviously changed, because our language, the English language, derived from a more Greek and philosophical point of view instead of the Jewish, Hebrew point of view. So, belief. So the knowledge that comes from the knowledge that comes from experience, the knowledge that is gained from experience. So I am under the impression from everything that I have studied, and I'm pretty concrete in this. I have not encountered or found any view that has really convinced me otherwise. But I don't think belief is a choice. I think faith is a choice. Faith is a choice to act on that unknown, to act on, there could be something there. It's an unknown. Now, it's interesting to me how many, quote unquote, believing people, they actually have, oh man, when you get into that frame of thinking of faith and belief, that faith is the willingness to be intimate with the unknown. In the scripture verses that I really base that off of is, again, it's with the Jewish and Hebrew concept of emunah, that original faith, applied to Hebrews 11:1 and Romans 8:24. So I get more into that in depth into my YouTube videos, but that's what it's based on. So when you start to look at faith being, that willingness to be intimate with the unknown in complete darkness, that it is a choice to act on something that you have no knowledge in hopes that it will appear or be made known, in hopes that it will be made into a belief. And then when you look at belief as something that is not a choice, but it's that you've come into this experience and you've come into this new mindset, this new frame of thinking where it's like, it's a blissful thing. It's not like, oh, I don't have a choice in the matter. Now I believe it. I mean, for some it's like that, depending on who you are and what your story is. But belief, coming into that knowledge, that true knowledge That it's not just book, it's not just philosophy, it's not just book knowledge, head knowledge, but it's actual knowledge from experience that you know. I mean, it's very close to knowing. And I think belief, the more experiences that you have and the more that you come into a belief of it, then belief starts to turn into knowing. That it's like the faith and belief is absolutely no more, that you just begin to know something. When you start to look at faith, belief, and knowledge like that, then you start to look at it's deconstructing, personally, it's deconstructing what I've heard many people say time and time again in the church or in church culture, where it's like faith requires an unknown. Faith requires an action. Faith without works is dead. I know I'm using a lot of Bible verses in this, which I know annoys some of my atheist listeners. But again, I'm doing that to get the not only the cultural context, but going back in history to a book that is old, but where those concepts originated from. That's why I keep going back to the Bible, because I think these concepts originated there, and so I think that they have a different meaning than what we how we are using them in today. And so I'm not, like I said, I'm not like doing this to preach a sermon, but I am using the Bible as more of a historical, contextual book at this moment. But when you, like, faith, it requires an unknown and it requires an action. And it's crazy to me how, from what I've seen in the church, a lot of people say they believe something, but there is actually no unknown there. They say they believe something, but there is still this, it's only understanding. And this gets, okay. Oh man, there's actually so much in this. I didn't know how long this podcast was going to be, but there is so much in just the faith, belief, and understanding. So let me keep going down this trail that I'm on. So people can have this, they say they believe in something, but it's actually their understanding that they have. It's actually all head knowledge. So what I mean by that is I've heard a lot of people that are struggling with belief in God. They'll say, yeah, just an example. I don't know. They'll say, how could a God create a hell? Did God create a hell? How could he create a hell? And, if he's an all-knowing God, create somebody knowing that they're going to go to hell. And so he creates them to go to hell, essentially, which that gets into a whole other many other theological arguments, but we're not going to go there. But somebody basically posing that question and then saying, I think that's the reason why I don't believe in God. Now, when I hear somebody say that, I say to myself, or I just think to myself, I'm like, I don't think you're struggling with belief in God. I think you're struggling with understanding. Now, for me personally, I don't understand everything. I don't even understand close to everything. I don't even, I feel like haven't even dipped my toe in the ocean yet. That's how much I know that I don't know. But I do understand a lot. And so for a lot, I confuse people because I do have an understanding of scriptures. I do have an understanding of the New Testament and of these different concepts. And they're like, how are you not, how can you say you don't believe in God? How can you say you're not Christian? How can you? And I'm like, just because I understand it doesn't mean I believe in it. Just because I know the ins and outs and the philosophies and the theological intricacies, not all of them, again, not even close to all of them, but a lot of them, just because I know that doesn't mean I actually believe it. And so I think from the understanding that I have, I think understanding is very important to have because I think your understanding helps with your perspective. And your perspective, if you have the wrong perspective, can lead you into cycles, religious cycles, dogmatic cycles, and it won't get you anywhere. But changing your perspective to something that can actually it creates a foundation for you instead of this ceiling. It creates this foundation instead. Like, a lot of people look at the Bible as a ceiling, where it's like, the Bible says this, nothing more, nothing less. This is what the Bible says. This is what it is. It's using the Bible as your ceiling instead of using the Bible as your floor and a foundation. And so changing your perspective, right, to create, like, have these principles in place to better your perspective, so that you have a perspective where now it's like that path into the unknown is open wide. Some religious, people don't even think questioning or skepticism or doubting or any of that, don't even think it's right to do. Don't even, don't question, kind of thing. There are some religious groups like that. So for somebody in those religious groups, they don't even have the correct perspective to, actually go on a journey of faith. Which I think, doubt is a part of faith. Questioning, skepticism, all of it is a part of faith. Even atheism, I would say, is a part of that journey of faith. And some people are going to disagree with that, but that's fine. I recognize, I keep saying time and time again, this is it's subjective, but I do think it applies. I do think that there is truth for it, not only because it's made sense to me in my life, but it's turned to work out in my life. And it's an understanding that has led me into, it's a perspective, I should say, that has led me into not only deeper understandings, but it's a perspective that has shown me a clear path. And that is the path of, faith and deconstruction. But also, being able to practice spirituality, and go into, like, practice going towards a possible belief. Like, I think belief is a gift. But going back to understanding. So yes, a lot of people will talk about, well, I think this is the reason I don't believe in God, or this is the reason, and I don't have the answer to this question. And it's like, oh, somebody does have the answer, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, they believe in God. I'm like, but what actually, your understanding changed, but that's all that changed. That didn't spark any belief in you. You only gained more knowledge. And knowledge is not your end. Knowledge is, knowledge is beneficial, but it's not you can learn all about love that you want, but until you do it, until you act on it, until you experience it, you have no idea what love is. And so it's difficult for me to hear people say, well, and this gets into, people asking me, what are questions that you have for Christians? Answers, questions that you don't have the answers to, that you feel like would help you. I want to help you out, bring you closer to, knowing God or whatever. And I'm like, you don't get it. Like, you're not getting it. But to come into belief is to actually experience something. That you gain this knowledge that comes from experience. And oftentimes that experience comes from this faith, this journey of faith that you have inside of you, this something, that there's just like this feeling, whether it be something you grew up with, whether it be something you were told, whatever it is, you have this thing inside of you that says, I think there could potentially be something more. And then choosing to act on that. You have no knowledge. You have no experience. You don't know what's on the other side. It's a complete blackness. It is a complete unknown. It is a complete darkness. And yet you're diving in. That is faith. To me, that is absolute faith. Belief is what's on the other side of that. Now, I do understand that the belief and faith can be interchangeable. Somebody could have an experience of something, and then they could say, well, I believe it. I've experienced it. I've come into knowing it. And then, 6 months down the road, there's an unknown, and then it requires faith. And then that journey of faith will bring you into more belief. So I think that, they're interchangeable. Some people start out with faith. Some people start out with belief, whatever the case may be. I know for me, I've been on a journey and a walk of faith for 3 years. Some people can call that dark night of the soul. Some people can call that whatever they want. Doesn't matter to me. But I don't consider myself a man of belief. but I do consider myself a man of faith. And a man of faith that is actively seeking, not just with head knowledge, but with practices and spirituality of going into that unknown. I don't know, and this is the purpose of my last episode, why I say God needs to die. Basically saying the God that I knew was an ideology, was a philosophy. When I found out what belief was, I was like, oh wow, I've never actually believed in God. I've just had this understanding of God that made sense to me. But in the journey of faith, those things need to die, because the God on the other end of that journey of faith might not be the God that you envisioned in your head all along. And the thing is, if you have this image in your head of exactly who God is, of this is what he's going to look like, and you get to that end of that journey of faith and God doesn't look like that, you're going to be like, oh no, that's not God. That's the devil. Or that's, a demon. Or that's a being of light that's disguising himself because it's really a demon. And it's like, some crazy thing like that. I don't know. But it's like, if you're not willing to let those things die, because here's the thing, if people have this understanding that all belief is understanding, then everybody is in, like, if that's the majority opinion, then everybody is right now is worshiping an ideology. Everybody right now just has their own philosophy and their own individualistic religion, and it's not actually experiencing a God. To me, when I was at ministry school, I had this conversation with one of my mentors, and I told him, I was like, I don't want anything to do with a religion that is not a religion. I don't want anything to do with a spiritual path that is not experiential. Like, if I can't experience this and live this out in my daily life, if that's not a possibility, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And he agreed with me. I think if, God is real and the life that, a spiritual person, whatever that looks like, and I guess what I'm referring to is somebody who is experiencing life in a supernatural way. If that exists, well, okay, I think that should be what spirituality is. That should be the height of it. And I know some spiritual teachers not involved in Christianity, more spirituality. They practice meditation. They have astral projection. They have, I guess manifesting can be a part of that. There's so many different spiritual practices where it's like, some people have pointed it down to science. Other people, it's there's so many, there's the stories of the mystics. Some are legend. Some, is it possible that they're real? And that's another one of those journeys of faith, right? It's like, is that legend? Is that myth? Which I think some of them are. Or is that real? Which I think some of them could very well be. And so I'm like, that's an unknown. Nobody really actually knows that. There's a bunch of people that claim, oh yes, this is in the history books. And it's like, well, just because it's in the history books in your church or in the Catholic Church doesn't mean it's not a myth. There's mythology in the Bible. Some people hate that, but they're like, no, it's literal. And I'm like, well, no. No. When you look at cultural references and when you look at the stories, there is myth in the Bible. So, oh man, I feel like hopefully you're understanding what I'm saying, because I feel like I finally feel like I've spoken my mind and I've got out what I'm trying to say. So hopefully you, can understand me when I say that I'm not a man of belief. I'm not a man that has experienced something, and I haven't gained any knowledge from that. The only knowledge from experience that I've gained is the knowledge of the joys and fears of life. And so I guess you can say right now I believe in materialism, even though I'm much more of an idealist. That, Rene Descartes talked about how our ideas are something that exists on a different plane. And materialism, a question that I have with that is, okay, well, what do you think of science, the science of other dimensions, where there are other dimensions that exist that we cannot see, feel, or touch, but that affect us, aka the dimension of time? It's like, well, that's not a material thing that we can feel. We can't smell it. We can't see it. We can't. Our senses cannot interpret that. Yet that is a dimension that exists that has a lot to do with our laws of the universe. So I am very much an idealist. Not sure how I got on that. Oh, because I much more believe in, materialism from what I've experienced. And, I read about the, time and the things that we can't comprehend. Like that's something that I guess I'm more of a agnostic idealist. Well, I don't know. This is the first, I'm just like, just kind of talking out loud right now. Whatever. Labels aside, I'm more of an idealist, but I've experienced more of a materialistic point of view. So faith, now the concept of faith outside of the biblical context, I think can be applied anywhere. And this is why I say I do think atheists, it's definitely agnostics, and I would say some Christians as well, have faith, or practice faith, I should say. And the reason I say that is because typically on both of the extreme sides of the spectrum, like a hard atheist or a very a God-believing person, a hard theist, you could put it that way, says, well, I know the answers. But an agnostic says, well, I embrace the mystery. There are things that I don't understand, but I am going to seek it out to find it. Some agnostics, some don't do that. Again, it's very subjective to the individual. So this is very general statements. But I do think that the concept of faith doesn't just, that concept of faith, being willing, a willingness to be intimate with the unknown, it doesn't just have to be applied to the Bible and to biblical context. The idea and the concept of faith can be applied to relationships and to people. And so can belief. It can be applied, the concepts of faith and belief don't just have to be applied to God, and to whether or not God exists in that entire argument. Faith, the concept of faith can completely be atheistic. And, that gets into, I guess an example of that is materialism into idealism. It's like there is, some science into idealism, like other dimensions and things that exist on other planes of existence, that we can see them in our mind's eye. We can kind of envision them. Like I'm talking, and a good example of that is time, right? And so how do we experience what time is? I mean, we experience it every single day, but you look at the science of it and time is an illusion. And so how is it something that we can control? Like there's no flow of time. Time doesn't flow, how we envision it, which is like in front of our eyes. It's always passing. It's actually a very stagnant, very, stationary thing. It's only our perception that's moving. And so how do we experience that? How do we experience time as a very stagnant, in-place thing, which to us would feel like time didn't exist, but that's the very essence of time, that it can bend and move and all of that. Well, through meditation. In meditation, I was just talking with a friend today. He is taking a class on the neuroscience and mirror neurons and different neurons in the brain, and he's learning a lot. He's going to school right now, School of Divinity, but he's taking a class on the neuroscience of the supernatural and supernatural encounters and experiences. And he was saying that in rituals and when we meditate, that our concept of time stops. And you can see this in the brain with the neurons that are firing, that our concept of time stops. And so I say all this to say, there are atheists that meditate. There are atheists that get in touch with something that is unknown. And, some might call them, well, I'm an agnostic atheist or an atheistic agnostic or whatever. My point being with all of this is that the concept of faith doesn't just have to be applied to God. Or I should say, people's idea of God. It can be applied to, like I said, relationships. It can be applied to life, and so can belief. You know, it's like you don't believe somebody until you experience it yourself, and then you're like, oh yeah, I totally 100% believe you. And it gets into different levels of faith and belief based on, because I can experience somebody and I can know them and I can get into this deep level of trust with them because they're right in front of my eyes. I've experienced them with my senses. It's not just an idea, but I have experienced them with my senses. And then they say, well, they did this. And because I know them and I've experienced them, on a level that is not just an understanding and head knowledge, but it's something that's like in the heart. There's a connection there that's taken place. Is that, oh, like, yeah, I believe you because I believe in them. I believe in that person. And so it's like, yes, I believe in the root. And so I'm going to believe that there's a branch and that there's fruit from that. And I realize that people could take that and say, well, I do the same thing with God. But I'm like, well, for an experience to happen and take place, I would say it is a infusion of almost an interruption to your reality, into your senses of being. How I know, like, when somebody has had something happen to them that could have been outside of themselves, that's greater than themselves, some sort of experience or something, is when it's hard for them to articulate it to me. Now, of course, this gets, like, of course, there are people that are struggle at articulating things, but then there are also people that are very good at articulating things, and then they say, they don't have the words, but they're saying, this is what happened. And I'm like, great for you. Good for you. You know, if that did happen, if that is what you experienced, you know, that to me is them being invited or on this journey of faith, and they're coming into a belief in something. So anyway, I could keep going on. I could keep rambling. I think I've made my point clear. Hopefully I've made my point clear, and some of you listeners haven't twisted it to mean something other than it's absolutely not. But even if that is the case, whatever. let it be what it is. So yeah, I am not a man of belief at the moment, even though I am a man of faith. And so, you know, at the end of faith, at the end of a journey of faith and diving into those unknowns, you know, there could be belief at the other end. And I realize that and I recognize that, and I have to prepare myself for that and really humble myself for that and for those things to potentially happen. So I'm open to it, which I think makes me a person of faith. You could call me you know what, and don't. I almost threw out some sort of label that I was just, as soon as I was going to say it, I was just going to say, yeah, don't call me that because that doesn't fit as well. Just a misfit. That's what a lot of people tell me. They're like, yeah, you're just a misfit, which I'm down with that. I like it. You know, I'm a Enneagram number 4, so don't put me in a box. But for real though, don't do that. So yeah, I hope that this podcast, I realize this is something that I've talked about on my channel, and it is something that is very subjective. Maybe this podcast, you know, meant something to you. Maybe this podcast helped you understand and give you language for your own journey or for somebody else's, or helps you even further on your deconstruction, or just construction of concepts for what they should be, which I guess is a part of deconstruction. But I hope this helped you out in some way. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've gotten to the end of this podcast, congratulations. Thanks again for listening to me rant for another 40 minutes. It's good. It's good stuff. The next podcast, well, I don't know if I should say that because, you know, yeah, it'll be the next podcast. I think it'll either be the next podcast or it was the podcast previous to this one. I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but Matthew Palmer is going to be my guest. He's the guy that I was talking about studying neuroscience, and he's going to the School of Divinity, learning a bunch of really awesome stuff. So if that podcast is already out, I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. And if I put this podcast out before that one, then we'll get ready for it, because it's going to be amazing. God, I don't know. I don't have a script to these things. I just talk. Whatever comes out, comes out. And if you get something from it, cool. If not, then I don't know. Thanks for listening. But for real, guys, thanks for listening, and really appreciate you all and your support, and the people who do listen to these things. It means a lot to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, love to know your thoughts. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you leave a like and a comment. If you're listening to this on some sort of streaming platform, be sure to hit me up on Instagram, nate.alger. Love to talk with you and answer your questions. And I will see you Misfits in the next one. Peace.